Just as boomers like Steve Jobs once remade America in their own image, just as the millennials gave us woke and hustle culture, what happens when the Zoomers get into the saddle? This month on View from the Danube, we're looking at youthquakes. In Britain, a younger set seems to be throwing off the old softly of their political culture, calling out migrant crime and brazenly leading the charge towards mass deportations. Meanwhile, in America, Tucker Carlson has interviewed Nick Fuentes. Fuentes has a massive online following, an audience who calls themselves Groypers. But for years, the mainstream right has kept him out of the conversation because of his bizarre shock jock behavior, Holocaust denial, and attacks on quote-unquote world Jewry. The interview, which was notoriously soft, has caused a ruckus inside the MAGA tent. Tucker says he merely wants to hear the arguments. But others ask, is there any future for the American right if it lets in the likes of Nick Fuentes? Even on the other side, the election of 34-year-old Zohran Mamdani as New York mayor, a man who wants government-run grocery stores and who regularly quotes Karl Marx, suggests that the youth are breaking about as far left as they ever have. Take all this foment and fast forward 15 years. Can the old mode of liberal democracy even hold it together in the face of what is pushing it from underneath? The Groypers, Mamdani, and the future. This time on View from the Danube. Hello, welcome to View from the Danube. I'm your host, Rod Dreher, and we're joined today by Sophia Ratz, Istvan Kish, and Callum Nicholson. And Istvan, you and I just got back from a trip to Washington, a very successful trip led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban and a big Hungarian delegation. Lots of good things happened for Hungary on this trip. This was Orban's first White House visit in 6 years. He had a bilateral meeting with President Trump and all kinds of side events. He was able to obtain, the Prime Minister, a one-year waiver of U.S. sanctions on Russian energy imports to Hungary, hugely important for this country. There was a $600 million liquid natural gas purchase agreement with U.S. suppliers, $280 million in U.S. investment deals announced. And it turns out that here in Hungary, the Prime Minister's domestic approval ratings jumped 5 points after the trip, the highest since 2022. What did you make of this trip to Washington?
Well, I think it was basically exceeding expectations. So I think if only we would have got some form of exemption from the oil and gas sections, we would have been very happy. But luckily, we were much more discussed, and we got some very concrete outcomes agreed, which would help our economy and actually an energy sphere greatly from these meetings. So I think if I look about it before the visit itself, as I said, I was kind of hoping that we will have some good discussions, there's going to be a good feeling, and we will get some form of exemptions. And if there's anything else, then I'm very happy, and it's really exceeding expectations. And what I saw is it was highly exceeding expectations. Of course, there's a lot of work put in on the Hungarian side. I know the ministries are really preparing a lot of documents. I know actually our American friends were preparing a lot of documents in the different kind of departments. So we know there was a lot of discussions before, but still, I mean, anything can happen. It can be just a nice visit and that's all. But luckily, that was not the case. Of course, we saw the very good kind of personal relationship between the PM and Trump, which is great. I think perhaps the only other kind of international leader I saw this was Netanyahu, but I'm not even sure it was the same with him. which is good. And also, the dinner they had with G.D. Vance, the vice president, that's also great. I mean, you can see that there's kind of a great kinship and even personal good relations between Orban and the highest members of the administration. So I think that's great. But if we would still have a huge deep state, or we would have a lot of people who are unfriendly to Hungary in the administration, they could have sabotaged some of the concrete things like the buying nuclear fuel or buying LNG gas. So they could have done some damage, but that luckily didn't happen. And I think that's partly because there's less of a deep state, but also luckily now we have much more friendly people in the administration itself as well.
Well, yeah, and I think that Prime Minister Orban has worked for years to build this relationship, a personal relationship with Donald Trump, and it really paid off in this summit. And I was present there for the meeting between Prime Minister Orban and Vice President J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is a personal friend of mine since years before he became vice president, and I went over early to meet him in his study at his personal residence. We had a private chat, and then the prime minister came in with a small entourage. This was the first time they had actually met personally. They had met formally at at signings and things like that. But we sat down there in the vice president's study, drank bourbon, and talked. And I got to tell you, what a privilege it was to sit there for about an hour and a half and listen to the Vice President of the U.S., the Prime Minister of Hungary, just talk like normal people. J.D. Vance was extremely curious about Europe, the situation in Europe, the situation in Hungary, and the Prime Minister gave him a very clear, robust briefing. It would be indiscreet to talk about in detail what they spoke of, but what I saw was two men who really understood each other and who liked each other. And the Prime Minister told the Vice President things about Europe and the situation in Europe with sovereignty, with mass migration, with Christianity in Europe, that the Vice President probably wouldn't hear from anybody other than me. And he's been hearing it from me for years, but to hear it from the Prime Minister of Hungary is a very different thing. When we finally stood up to leave, I knew that these men are friends. And if JD becomes the next president of the United States, which I certainly hope will happen, it's going to be very, very good for Hungary. So it was a massive success, I would say.
So do you think now he's like a focal point for America, the Prime Minister, when it comes to Europe, like Central Eastern Europe? Because that's a good position to be in.
Yeah, I think so. And I was able to back up the Prime Minister when he was talking about the weakness of Western Europe with mass migration, with the problem with Islam, with the collapse of religious faith in Western Europe, and why Central Europe is holding the line. The Prime Minister told him that, but I, as the Vice President's friend, I said, what he's telling you is true. Yeah. It really is.
You have the on-field experience here.
Yeah, and I was able to back up the Prime Minister in a completely honest way. And it's so hard, I think, for Hungarians to understand how biased the news is in America about this country and about Europe itself. And it is sadly the case that not even American diplomats will necessarily give the true story to the president and the vice president about the situation in Europe. But Viktor Orban did. And it was amazing because I believe it was the vice president's office who invited Prime Minister Orban over. This wasn't something that the Hungarian side requested. It was something that the vice president wanted to see happen. And it did. And I have to tell you this, too. This tells you something about who J.D. Vance is. I got there half an hour early so we could have a little private time as friends to talk. I walk into the vice president's house on the Naval Observatory grounds. You have to go through so much security. He was finishing up dinner with his family. The kids were playing everywhere. He has 3 small children. Also at the table were one of JD's cousins from Texas and her boyfriend and somebody else. and the cousins were dressed like they were going out to dinner at McDonald's, right? and his cousin Rachel's boyfriend even had his baseball cap on.
And pajamas.
No pajamas, but at the table at the vice president's house. Now, I couldn't imagine you would go dressed to the vice president's house like that. But the fact that that was normal for JD and he didn't make his cousins feel uncomfortable or anything, to me that says something great about his character, that whatever else you think of JD Vance, this is a man who has not forgotten where he comes from. And also I got to speak with his wife, Usha. I think she is his secret weapon. That woman is so full of grace. And they really love each other. There's been some talk, some on the far right have, since Charlie Kirk was killed, they've...
Oh, yeah.
You've seen that.
Yes, I saw it, yeah.
They put out memes where JD was embracing Erica Kirk, the widow, and some of the people
the theories.
who hate JD on the far right have said, oh, they're having an affair. It's crazy. And JD invited his wife, Usha, in to meet Prime Minister Orban, who kissed her hand very graciously. And
he's very good at that. He got very good in that. In the past 2 years, he had enough.
And then when Usha excused herself so the men could talk business, she and JD kissed, and Usha said to her husband, I love you. And it was a small thing, but it really said something about who he is and who they are together.
It always comes down to us women, backing you guys up. So I understand that part.
It was a great moment. And I can't believe that the vice president gave us about 90 minutes to talk. And it was serious talk. It wasn't just chit-chat, serious geopolitical talk. And JD, who was a Catholic, asked the Prime Minister, have you met Pope Leo? He goes, yes, I met Pope Leo. And he said, we have a Pope, a Holy Father, who is really a believer in God. Yes. And
did he try to convert the Prime Minister?
He didn't. He didn't. But one thing I will say, we were talking about Christianity in Europe because JD really cares about this. A lot of Europeans think, oh, he hates Europe because of the Munich speech. Absolutely not true. But JD, as a Catholic, is very concerned about the situation of Christianity in Europe because I think he believes, as Prime Minister Orban has said many times before, that the future of Europe depends on the state of the Christian faith here. And it was a concern. I mean, the Prime Minister talked about how even here in Hungary, a lot of people don't go to church. And you can't maintain a Christian nation if people don't go to church. You can pass all the laws you want that are, quote unquote, pro-Christian. But if the people aren't showing up in church, it's not going to matter. And that's something really important for the American vice president, and I hope future president, to know. He's a faithful Catholic, a convert from 2019. He cares a lot about religion. And we have the same situation in America, too, with Generation Z. Those under 30, they are the least religious generation in American history. And unless you actually have them turning up in church, unless their religion means something to them, then the Christianity is just superficial and the society will fall apart.
Is it not something, though, in the fact that you had this meeting you're at, and you had a prime minister of a country that talks a lot about the importance of the Christian faith to that nation, meeting a vice president who was himself in his late 30s converted to Catholicism? Because there is a lot of evidence that in the last even 18 months or 2 years, conversion rates or baptism rates are very high across Europe. And I don't know what you make of that. Is there, because you say that the Gen Z is the least religious, but I wonder if something is beginning to turn around.
I think so, and I think that there's like a wave of young people choosing Christianity, and I think that's because of the disillusionment that they experience in politics and in regards to the existing institutions, not the churches, but the political institutions. And after facing so many disillusionments, for a generation that is so focused on authenticity, they really are looking for something that's real and raw or even harsh. And religion, going to church, reading the Bible, living a faith-based life, a Christian life, that really requires you to be very raw and harsh sometimes. And I think that my hope is that our generation, my generation, is now experiencing a new wave of turning to God and turning to faith and choosing Christianity because they see it as something that's authentic and something that they can actually believe in the real sense of the word of believing.
And I want to say the same. So I'm not sure Gen Z is actually the less religious. I thought it was Millennials.
Yes.
And my understanding
Let's defend
is...
Gen Z.
And maybe that in Hungary, but in the US, it's absolutely Gen Z. I've just recently looked at the numbers.
Yeah.
Because my personal experience is that I met more and more people, especially in the Anglosphere, who are recent converts. And actually surprised, because I think in Hungary, quite honestly, as a Catholic, it pains me to say, but I think here it's more evangelical religions which are gaining ground. And Catholicism is actually dropping. But in America and the UK, I was pleasantly surprised that actually it's most of the young people are choosing the Catholic Church. Sometimes actually Orthodoxy as well, but I think predominantly the Catholic Church. So I personally have a lot of good, and I might be living in a bubble, I don't know, but I have a lot of kind of pleasant personal experiences where I'm meeting a lot of young people and they tell me they have either recently rediscovered their Catholic roots or they actually just converted from some Protestant religion to Catholicism because they feel that's still kind of the most traditional faith. And those are actually younger than I am. So I'm a millennial, but these are usually under 30 people.
But in the U.S., the numbers don't look good for the Catholic Church. Yes, you are seeing some more high-profile converts to Catholicism, usually more intellectual types. But for every one person that converts to Catholicism, 8 Catholics leave. And they either leave for Protestantism or for nothing. And this is, I think, a generational thing, too. And it could be the case that once you get these Zoomer or young millennial priests into parishes, priests who are actually much more conservative and who actually believe this stuff, because Christianity in America now, it has to become more demanding or it's going to fall apart, which is actually happening. The mainline Protestant churches are really losing. And so are the Catholic churches, which had been in the past able just to count on people's latent Catholicism. They come to the Catholic Church because it's just there. This is what we do. COVID broke that. A lot of people, Catholic and Protestant, just quit going to church after COVID. Pope Benedict, the 16th, predicted back in 1969, when he was just a priest, he predicted that in the future, the church, meaning the Catholic Church, would lose a lot of power and influence and lose a lot of its people. But those who stay behind will be much more dedicated to the faith. And out of their conviction, the church will be reborn. I think we may be living through that now, but it's going to take some time to play out.
One thought I've been having is that one thing that's very clear across Western culture, particularly the Anglosphere, is what our friend Ibn Tranholm calls the meaning crisis, where you have a lot of people with this vacuum of meaning, this sense of alienation from everything. And but I've been thinking about this idea of a meaning crisis because you could sympathetically look at the woke movement, which seems to be in its death throes now. But actually that is a, well, who knows?
Let's hope.
but actually it was a very Christian movement. It was very millenarian, it was very Puritan. And in some ways it was people, whether they may be misguided or not, it was that they were seeking some sort of meaning and they were attaching themselves to authoritative truths, they believe. This is my truth, it's authoritative. But I do wondering that this seeking for meaning is actually a seeking for authority, which comes back to what you said, Sophie, that I think that right now people are looking for something to give their life shape and meaning, but really that means to have someone who is an authority that they can look to. And I think that's why probably people will turn to forms of religion, perhaps Catholicism, where there's quite a clearer sense of your place in the hierarchy. And that gives people a sense of structure, I think. So I'm not that surprised if Catholicism is the one that some people are turning to.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, as a young person, you really, of course, they always say you want to rebel, but it's not even about rebellion. You want to stand for something. And that's the tricky thing about the whole woke movement. You think that with that, you can stand for something. And I think the deeper you go into it, you discover that it really means you don't have to stand for anything. You can be men, women, whatever you want to be. So then you have, as I said, this sense of disillusionment that if I am in this movement, I'm not even standing for anything, because everything is relative. I can be whoever I want to be. I can do whatever I want to be. There's no, again, authority, and there's nothing for you to stand for. As a Christian person, you do have to stand for your values, and you have to be very deeply rooted in your faith to stand for those values, and it gives you I don't even like a sense of being in control, or a sense of belonging to something. And this comes back to what you said about the whole thing with churches and COVID. I think the reason why it took a toll on young people's mental health, that they couldn't go to communities, they couldn't go to the church, and the community and the church would have the power to keep you in your faith, in your belief, to encourage you if you need it. And that's what COVID took away: the communities, the churches, the people who think like you, who believe in the same God as you. And if that's taken away from you, that could really push young people who are very easy to, they can easily be pushed into a very bad space.
But I think that's the main problem here. So you mentioned authority. I mean, historically, you had several authorities. So you had faith as church, you had the nation, you had family. Yeah. And I think the left has very purposely pulled all three out. I mean, it's evident. You can see, the writings of George Lukács. He was a Hungarian communist philosopher, where he was attacking these three institutions because they identified these as the biggest kind of problem for the workers to unite. That's why they couldn't embrace themselves in the First World War, because we have these three institutions which give other loyalties to people. And I think that's kind of the crisis. I mean, it's an ongoing crisis, because the whole crisis coming with communism, Nazism in the 20s, 30s is coming already from this. But I think identity politics and kind of all these ideologies are at root coming from this problem that we need some form of meaning, structure, authority in our life, and more people are, and that's kind of, I think, a real danger, because it could be that, yes, people will go back to some of these ideologies, sorry, not ideologies, because I don't like the word. I mean, this is faith and nation. I don't see them as ideologies, actually, but they will actually find other dangerous ideologies like wokery, like far-right things, who knows what, to find meaning and purpose in life.
Well, that's a good segue to our next segment, because you and I, Istvan, arrived in Washington at a moment of real crisis for the right over this interview that Tucker Carlson, the most popular and influential conservative media figure in America, an interview he did with a young guy named Nick Fuentes. Now, Nick Fuentes is 27 years old. He has a popular live stream show on Rumble, one of these alternative platforms. Fuentes is charismatic, but he's also crazy. He rants all the time about Jews, about world Jewry. He's praised Hitler. He said Hitler is effing cool. He praises Stalin. He is a white nationalist. He condemned Vice President J.D. Vance for being a race mixer, for marrying a woman from India. I mean, all kinds of things like that, extremely controversial. The guardians of the right have kept him pretty much on the sidelines for a while, until Tucker Carlson came along. On October 27th, Tucker Carlson invited Nick Fuentes onto his interview show, which itself was very controversial, because a lot of people have said, don't magnify this guy's voice. He's only destructive. Well, Tucker had him on and then gave him a 2-hour interview that was totally softball. He didn't ask really critical questions. At one point, Fuentes, who was on his best behavior, to be fair to him, he said that he admired Stalin, and Tucker just let it go by.
He didn't even ask for what?
No, he said, we'll come back to that. He never came back to that. It was, to me, shocking, because I know Tucker Carlson can give tough interviews, but he completely softballed Nick Fuentes. This caused a huge blow-up on the right. And the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, who's a friend of us here at the Danube Institute, for some reason he felt it necessary to produce a video statement saying that we stand by Tucker Carlson, he's a friend of ours, and we'll never abandon our friend. And Kevin Roberts condemned those who were criticizing Tucker for platforming Nick Fuentes. Kevin Roberts condemned them as, quote, venomous. Well, that just made things worse. And so now, as we speak, the American right is tearing itself apart over Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson. I made it a point when I was in Washington to try to talk to as many of these Zoomers, Generation Z conservatives, as I could, because I had been told by a Washington insider who is a millennial himself that about 30 to 40% of the staffers in the White House and Congress and across the conservative institutes in Washington are followers of Fuentes. Mm-hmm. They may not be full-on followers, but they at least listen to him and take their guidance from him. In talking to these Zoomers, I found out that 30 to 40% number, which is shocking, is probably accurate. Mm-hmm. And I asked one very smart Zoomer, I said, what do they see in this guy? He doesn't offer anything. He doesn't have a platform. He doesn't make demands. He's just destructive. My interlocutor said, they don't look to him for a platform. All they want to do is tear things down. And this is going to be a big issue because the liberal media are going to try to hang Nick Fuentes around J.D. Vance's neck. J.D. Vance is the presumptive heir to Donald Trump. If he runs for president in 2028, he is the front runner. J.D. Vance hates Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes has attacked J.D.'s wife. He's called her a jeet, which is a slur for Indian people. He's a horrible man, but J.D. is close to Tucker. And J.D. is so loyal to Tucker, loyalty means a lot to J.D., that J.D. has not come out and said anything yet about this. I said to the vice president when I met with him, I said, you've got to make a statement, because these people, these Groypers, as the followers of Fuentes call themselves, they are a fifth column within the Republican movement. They don't have a lot of power now, but their power will be magnified because Tucker's interview helped normalize them. And you've handed to the left and also to JD's opponents within the right, like the Texas Senator Ted Cruz, they're doing everything they can to magnify the influence that Fuentes has on the vice president. So this fight is really about the post-MAGA future. And I don't know where it's going to end up, but I can tell you this. Normal people outside of Washington, normal Republican voters, believe it or not, they hate Nazis. And Nick Fuentes is a Nazi.
On this topic, I think the most important thing to do with a phenomenon like that is to work out what's gone wrong that people are actually find this sort of rhetoric appealing. And I like to say that people often in today's society confuse the cure and the symptom, or the disease and the symptom. Mm-hmm. And look at Nick Fuentes, and I think that movement is a symptom of a deeper problem. And unless everyone, not just the Republicans, the American society can identify what is the structural problem that's failing an entire generation, then they're not going to solve the problem. They're not going to get rid of the symptoms. And the symptom is not the problem. The symptom is the symptom. So, and I think there's a couple of things. The center of America, not even the center, the mainstream of American society, which arguably Donald Trump is himself part of that elite and always has been, whatever he may say. He's a countercultural figure in the sense that he was not a professional politician. So he tore down the professional politicians. What Trump did not do down was tear down the mainstream. And I think what showed that Trump is part of that elite was probably been the Epstein issue, where it's shown this
Jeffrey Epstein,
where it's been very cross-party phenomenon. It's about the American elite. And there are people who are looking at this and see it as very corrupted in general. I use the Epstein case as just an example of that. And so when you look at what's happening, I think it's a case that the mainstream culture is failing, or is only serving a particular generation. It's not serving the younger ones. They're fed up with it. And on top of that, they're all on social media, where, of course, the more extreme you are, the fresher it seems, the more it drives attention. So it's a combination of the two of them is leading to this, I think.
But I agree, and I think that's why I'm not sure it's actually good to call out these people. So I kind of felt the whole thing with Kevin Roberts and the heritage thing was a bit too much. So I mean, and I'm a millennial, I have to say again, but I kind of sympathize with some of these Zoomers of how they have these frustrations. And I think when, let's say, what they call boomers call them out of being anti-Semitic, racist, it's just they will not care. They will embrace it more. So I think the solution is not calling out. I mean, I don't really know the work of Fuentes, and honestly, I mean, from the name, I wouldn't really think he's a WASP. So isn't he Latino or something?
He's Mexican-American.
So it's very strange how a Mexican-American can be...
Ironic.
It is an insane situation, but if you go on YouTube and watch 5 minutes of Fuentes, it's really alarming.
Yeah, but perhaps when we have to say that this guy is really too much and we can distance this from ourselves from this guy himself, but I would be very kind of cautious about going to young people and kind of tell them how to do things, because I don't think that ever works. And going back to Callum, I think the main problem here is, and I think we can see this fracturing a bit because there are bigger symptoms. So I think a lot of people, when they elected Trump, thought that things will be lovely-jubbly in a month or something. And that didn't happen. The economy is not doing very well. You have these things like the Epstein list, other frustrations, which I think some voters have, young people have as well, that they feel that we had this great momentum, but what's going on? So I think the infighting is perhaps because you have some of these issues which are not really being dealt with, and this is kind of a scapegoat for that. So this...
I think that's absolutely the case. And the vice president, I can tell you, understands this, that Nick Fuentes came from somewhere. If you are in Generation Z, you grew, especially if you're a white male, and most of Fuentes' followers are white males, but not all. You grew up in a society and a culture that told you everything that's wrong in the world is your fault,
yes,
because you're white and because you're male. And you were seriously disadvantaged because of that. You saw left-wing people in the media and everywhere else being openly racist against white people, openly bigoted against Christians, against heterosexuals, against conservatives, and nobody cared. They even got praised for that. That's the world you grew up in. You grew up in a world in which the authorities in your schools told you that you should take on heavy debt to go to college. You did, and now you find yourself unable to get a job, but owing a lot of student debt money. You grew up in a world in which men could be women, women could be men, and if you objected to this in any way, they would cancel you, and on and on and on. Plus, the Zoomers were the first generation to grow up with the internet. And we all know how the internet polarizes and isolates people. Now, I wrote a book called Live Not by Lies about the rise of wokeness as a form of totalitarianism. In that book, I quote Hannah Arendt, the great 20th century political theorist, who talked about the conditions that lead to a rise in totalitarianism, or the susceptibility to it. She said that mass loneliness and atomization is by far the most important factor. That's everywhere in America now. She also said that transgression for the sake of, just for the pleasure of it, is also a sign. That's what Fuentes does. He doesn't care what you think. And his followers, they're openly racist and anti-Semitic, and they enjoy that because it makes the older people upset. A third factor, Arendt pointed out, was people who are willing to believe anything that satisfies them psychologically over the truth. We see that with conspiracy theories going crazy. There's this woman, Candace Owens, who is also in the Fuentes group. You know, she's claimed things like Emmanuel Macron's wife has a penis. Yeah. You know, just lunatic things. And now she's saying that...
Who knows?
Brigitte Macron has actually filed a libel lawsuit, and she's going to win it. Candace Owens is now claiming on her very popular streaming show that Charlie Kirk's colleagues conspired with the Mossad to have him assassinated.
And they abandoned him.
Yeah. We have a confession from the Kirk assassin, who was a radicalized young leftist who was defending the honor of his transgender lover by shooting Charlie Kirk. that should be good news for the left that this happened. But no. They're going to conspiracy theories. One of the things I didn't mention in my book is anti-Semitism. Hannah Arendt said that's always a telltale sign. I didn't mention it because my book came out in 2020. It focused on the left because the right didn't have all these other problems with radicalism like the left did. But anti-Semitism was pretty much contained on both the left and the right. That has exploded on both the left and the right now. So I think you're right to say that we have to focus on root causes, but that doesn't mean that we can afford to be silent in the face of Nick Fuentes, who won't give us that option anyway. He's already threatened J.D. Vance, saying, if you criticize me, I'm going to turn my army of Groypers loose on you.
Well, there's actually an interesting parallel, and it's interesting you brought up the trans issue and with Charlie Kirk, of course, is that for me, the Groypers are the equivalent for the right of what the trans movement was for the left, because in a sense, the trans movement was rebelling against the norms of the body, in a sense, and the institutions. They were trying to change how institutions saw the body, so men and women's sports, these sorts of things. And what's happening with the Groypers? They seem to be rebelling against the norms of the body politic. They're again challenging the norms of society, the institutional framings. And I think the risk for the right of that movement is precisely the risk of what happened to the left with the trans movement, because the trans movement was an example of some of the extremes of the left, which then the right could tar the entire left that way, and I think that damaged the Democrat Party a lot in the last election. And so the worry is that there is a playbook of how to lose an election, and the Democrats just had it, and the Republicans are at risk, I think, of doing this. And in a sense, and I think I've used this phrase before on the show, but my way of framing it is that the left had virtue signaling, the right is in danger of having vice signaling, where they're simply signaling their vices, things like inviting really terrible human beings like Andrew Tate and promoting these people in some way. I think it's
which
just
Tucker
doing
Carlson
it.
has done.
Yeah, and I think this is really just that phrase of own the libs. But people call it being an edgelord, and the world's full of these edgelords on either end of the spectrum. And one side claimed that they were doing it out of virtue, but were quite vexatious in doing so. And the other side here is and the right now is I think just often vice signaling. And I don't know if they're trying to signal something to the vice president. I don't know, but
I still think that if you fix the economy, fix universities, because anti-Semitism is coming from universities. So, I mean, the left is becoming anti-Semitic because of universities. So why are we surprised that the right is becoming anti-Semitic? I mean, they go to the same universities. So I think we have a lot of these problems, help them get married, help them start a life. I'm pretty sure that if his Groypers would have a boyfriend, or boyfriend if they are women, I'm not sure a lot of them are women, they would be much more happier and far less problematic. So I think they have these legitimate frustrations, which you mentioned, Rod, and give them different, role models. So why don't we have you speaking to them more? I mean, what you said, I understand your frustrations, but what this guy is telling you is terrible. I think they need more role models, but in the end, if we don't, and as I said, I mean, I don't want to, I like Trump. It's much better than the alternatives. But if we don't give them real solutions, for economic problems, for the housing crisis, I mean, here in Hungary, we're much more luckier because the government is actually looking at these problems and trying to help. I'm not saying everything is successful or everything is wonderful, but there are talks about it, and actually you have several programs which help young people to get married and start a life. And I think that's the main problem here, and that you don't have it in America. And I hope that Trump, I have much more hope for J.D. Vance, actually, if he gets the president.
Trump is a 79-year-old boomer. Yeah. He's not going to be the one
to look into these problems and actually help these, because then these frustrations will disappear. Yeah. Sorry, I will give you a short, but in the 2000s, the far-right party in Hungary was becoming extremely popular. I mean, they had basically paramilitaristic things running around in the Hungarian villages because the left allowed it. Orban came in, he actually kind of banned all these organizations, but he also fixed the economy. These movements basically disappeared because there was no reason. Economy went better, safety got better, and most of these young most of them actually young males in the countryside, they just got the proper jobs, got married, and the whole thing disappeared. Of course, we had to have a strong force saying that, we're not supporting these things at all, and actually ban some of these movements. But what really helped is fixing the economy. So I think in this case, that is what the right should be focusing on.
I agree with you in role models, but then again comes back the question of authentic characters. I think the only way a role model can work if they're authentic. And what you said about virtue signaling, I think it's very important. For me, it's a very interesting situation. Born in '97, because I am like halfway millennial, halfway Gen Z, so like right on the fence. And what I see, my generation is, and those who are following characters like Fuentes, are people who are tired of and disappointed by virtue signaling. So they would value an authentic character over a character who has morals. They don't care about, and that's the very thing that characters like Fuentes use. They know that they don't have to be morally right. They know that they don't have to make even a distinction between doing the right and the wrong things. All they have to do is be angry enough, loud enough, and raw enough to catch the attention of those who are looking for authenticity. Again, I can't say that word today.
So I just want to kind of make a point here on the Fuentes thing, because perhaps don't showcase him, but debate him. So one other thing which I think was problematic here in Hungary in the 2000s, that basically the mainstream parties disregarded Jobbik. They said, these are far-right people, we don't have to talk to them, we don't have to debate.
Jobbik being the far-right party.
And that actually helped them, because they could effectively show that, you know, the mainstream parties are bad. They don't want to debate us because we have the truth. And I think that's a mistake. So actually you have to fight these people. And I think a very good example of this was actually NetCon, where you had, I will not remember now, the American conservative editor guy debating on Israel.
Kurt Mills, I think.
And it was a very interesting thing. I mean, and I'm shout out to the NetCon people that they did it, because they noticed this problem that people are getting frustrated with some of the Israel policies of America. And of course, NetCon, there's a lot of Jewish people involved. It's pretty pro-Israel, and they still had this debate showcasing Kurt Mills, who was very, very anti-Israel. Debating about this topic, and I think that was actually good, because you could air out the stale air a bit.
I think you're right about that, but you cannot debate Nick Fuentes himself, because if you watch him, he's all over the map. There's no core there. He's just ready to say the most outrageous thing he possibly can. But it is true that we have to take part of taking the complaints seriously, the things that radicalize these young people, is being able to debate it. And I think, as someone who is very strongly in favor of Israel, I think it's simply a fact of political life that the place that Israel has played for so long in American political life, where it was untouchable, that's gone now. And we on the right in America and on the left, have to allow for this debate about Israel and treat it more like a normal country. The problem, though, is it's so hard for people to debate Israel and the role of the state of Israel without sliding into anti-Semitism. It is not the case that to be against Israeli government policies makes you an anti-Semite. That's absolutely true. The problem is that the people who are most critical of Israel also employ openly anti-Semitic rhetoric. So it's a really difficult thing.
Yeah, that's the argument that Candace actually makes usually, that she is not against, the Jewish people or Jews, but the Israeli government. So that's how she's trying to frame.
And she's lying, though, because she's also talked about the blood libel about how Jews,
Yeah, I know. I saw that. Yeah.
I mean, so she's playing a very slippery game here, and this is part of the complexity of how to handle this. Because I'm not anti-Semitic, but do you know about this Jewish conspiracy?
Exactly. I know. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I was just thinking about something Sophie said about authenticity, and because the thing is, the last 15 years, everything's been quite honestly bullshit. There's so much in the culture is artifice.
No, that's
true. We talk about bullshit jobs. We hear about this concept. But a lot of life is been bullshit for quite a long time.
Yes.
And certainly coming out of the Anglosphere and spread worldwide as a consequence. And it's not just the things we buy and the things we consume, but it's the positions we hold, it's the performativity of our virtue, it's all these things. And I think there is a sense that people, that the old artifices, the bullshit is giving up the ghost. We're at a point where People are seeing that, in a sense, the emperor has no clothes. And I think it began with the financial crisis in 2008. People realized there was economic bullshit. And then we spread to other forms of the same genre, really, throughout the culture. But I think what's happening is people are now looking for something authentic. But the difference, but the challenge is this. To bullshit in a bullshit culture, as for instance the Democrat Party have been doing for a long time, takes no courage. It takes no courage to be an ally when there's no risk to being an ally, to someone in this virtuous sense. But actually, to break from these dominant norms, to break from the bullshit, takes one of two things. It takes either courage or insanity. And the problem is you don't often know which it is. So you look at someone like Nick Fuentes, that guy may be insane. Or an
interesting combination of the two, in interesting ratios.
Yeah, and so young people may be looking at, these people who are watching Nick Fuentes may look at him and think, what a courageous man. He may just be completely mad. But the thing is, there is I think their interest in someone's having what may appear to them the courage to something, but it may simply be the insanity. I think that urge to find something authentic is probably true, and maybe they're finding it in the wrong places and with the wrong people. But that's where it comes down to of people with a bit more experience, perhaps looking at the world and having the courage to say what is true and to point out what is bullshit in a way that can be understood. Otherwise, people will seek it out in dark corners.
And the left, especially the Democrats in America, are very good at constructing these bullshit characters. I mean, like AOC, like the only server who brings nothing to the table, as we all know.
I've not had that.
I wanted to make that for a long time.
That's a good one.
Greta Thunberg, who used to, want to save the world, and is now, yay, go Palestine. So and that's what I think. My generation is looking at these characters. Are you kidding? Did anyone ever think that this was going to work?
We're going to come to Zohran Mamdani in a moment, but I want to say, before we leave the right, I want to say that I really do believe, and not just because he's my friend, I think J.D. Vance is the only figure in American politics who can be the authentic voice speaking up for the people who've been forgotten and left behind, and the Gen Z people who've been raised in chaos. But he can do it not only because he's young, he's 41 years old, but and he's not a boomer who's disconnected or an Xer like me who's disconnected, but also because he lived that life. Yeah. If you read Hillbilly Elegy, his memoir, he grew up without a father in the home, like so many of these angry young men. His life was totally chaotic. His mother was a drug addict. He could have had the crappy life like so many of the others of his generation who grew up like him did. But it didn't happen that way. It didn't happen that way because his rough pistol-packing mama, his grandmother, helped save him from that. And then he went into the U.S. Marine Corps and learned the value of discipline and self-respect. He raised himself out of this. He did not choose to surrender to his fate, but rather he became somebody. And I think he can speak with authenticity about to the experience of so many of these young Americans, but tell them, you don't have to live that way. Take some moral agency here, and we'll help you in the government, but the government can't do everything for you. Let's work together as partners. I can't think of a single other figure in American life, on the right certainly, other than JD, who can do that. The question is, will he seize the moment, or will he be too intimidated by his friendship with Tucker and by offending these?
Can I just add one thing? If there's one lesson of Trump for all political parties, really, but certainly the right, is that you need to, that everything Trump did in both elections is he took a punt on things. He didn't try and triangulate to anything. He was just raw Trump all the way, and it was compelling because he didn't try and win anyone over. He was funny, he was compelling, but he was abrasive. He offended people across the spectrum. A lot of people voted for him holding their nose, especially in 2016. And I think the lesson of Trump is that there is Trump. The paradox of Trump is that he is at the same time the most artificial person on the planet and the most authentic. It's a very strange combination. And in a sense, he's he's deeply American in that sense. It's a very authentic, genuine place that's also full of all this performative artifice.
But that's kind of
and so if J.D. Vance, if he could learn just to not get into that politician's mindset of how do I triangulate my way to victory, to say I'm going to boldly go where no man has gone before, and hopefully that leads to the next generation.
But that's the thing, you don't just stay authentic. Like it takes a lot of work to stay authentic, and if he's willing to do that, I think if he keeps reminding himself, you don't just stay authentic, especially in a position of a vice president. It's easy to kind of believe like, now I'm the king of the world, I can do whatever I want. So to stay authentic is a work. And what you said about Trump is, I think, is a huge part or portion for his relationship or friendship with Viktor Orban, because in a very different sense, but somehow parallelly, he's the same character. I mean, Trump himself said about him at this meeting, I think he put it like, respected by everyone, liked by some. And I think that's a position in which they can both exist very comfortably, because they don't want to be liked by everybody. What they do deserves respect, and some like them and agree with them, and some never will.
Here's a challenge that J.D. Vance will face with the Groypers, the Nick Fuentes people. Fuentes and his followers are openly hostile to anyone who is non-white. They are racist. That's not a liberal making that up.
This is the Mexican guy.
Yeah, I know, crazily enough. So I talked to a MAGA Zoomer in Washington who is of Indian extraction. His parents are immigrants from Southern Asia. And he said to me, look, Indian Americans are natural Republicans. We're educated, we're hardworking, we want to follow all the middle-class values. We're natural Republicans.
Family-oriented.
But we will not vote for a party that makes room for somebody like Nick Fuentes, who is a racist, who hates us. And I think that this is a massive risk for the Republicans, because Trump did so well, better than any Republican had in presidential candidate ever, with winning over the votes of minorities.
Yes.
They can squander that if they don't handle this Fuentes thing correctly. Meanwhile, let's go to New York City. Since we were last together, voters there elected as their next mayor Zohran Mamdani, a 37-year-old Democratic socialist and Muslim who had almost no political experience, but he was hands down the most charming candidate. He ran a great campaign. And that guy, Mamdani, toppled a great Democratic Party dynasty, the Cuomo family dynasty in New York. So America's most important city is now going to be governed by a Democratic socialist who has identified with the BDS movement to isolate Israel. He's ultra woke. He's even said that he wants to put higher taxes on white people. And you think this has to be a joke. Yeah. It's not a joke. He's actually said this. I think it would be illegal, but this is where he's coming from. And he actually got a third of the Jewish vote, even though he's incredibly hostile to Israel. So this has been a generational change in New York City. I think that probably one of the best jobs in America right now is to be a real estate agent in Boca Raton in South Florida, because a lot of Jews are going to be leaving New York.
There, yeah.
Yeah, and we've already seen mass resignations from the New York Police Department because Mamdani has been strongly, as an activist, anti-police. I don't think he's a Muslim extremist. I don't think he's a serious Muslim at all. But he did campaign with some Muslim extremists, including an imam in Brooklyn called Siraj Wahhaj, who was an unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and is tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. So there's crazy stuff happening in New York right now. Mamdani ought to be a gift to the Republicans, because they can point to him and say, see how radical the Democrats are? But it's also the case that Mamdani plugged into the youth vote and the excitement the youth have on the left for this non-white, very ethnically aware, woke politician. What do you think when you see Mamdani as mayor? Now, let me say one more thing. I was a New Yorker on September 11th. 2001. I was writing for the New York Post. I stood on the Brooklyn Bridge and saw the South Tower fall with my own eyes. If you had told me that within 25 years, our heroic mayor, Rudy Giuliani, one of his successors would be a woke socialist Muslim, I couldn't have believed it. And here we are.
Well, I think one explanation is that I'm sure you saw the statistics that New Yorkers who were born in New York actually didn't vote for him. So he got far more votes on people who have been living there. The most votes he got actually from the people who only lived there for 5 or less years. But he also, I think, won the most people who were not actually born in New York but live in New York for more than 5 years as well. So I think that's one explanation to of what you said, Rod. So I think it's a bit frightening to see how immigration can change cities quite rapidly. So I think that's one conclusion we have to take from this. And in London, you had a Muslim mayor for quite some time. So it's not surprising. I think that will come in several other Western cities as well. As a Hungarian, it's also kind of sad. But if you go back to the original topic, I think it's again, he resonates with young people because you have social problems. And I think America is kind of a very prime example of this, because I grew up with this huge fascination with America. But when I started to go to America, I realized that, the social contract there, we have some problems. So, I mean, the homelessness situation is terrible, the drug addiction, the kind of the crazies on the streets, very bad public infrastructure. So I kind of start to feel actually pretty happy that I'm a European and we have some of these state institutions. So I mean, coming from a post-communist country, I have my doubts with the huge state involvement, but I think America really went the other way. And I think, and that's why I kind of very much embrace the national conservatism movement, because I think that's the best solution for America, which embraces some of these social elements. Like Orban as well. I mean, some of Orban's policies, some Republicans will call socialists. I don't think that's the case. He's caring for his own people. And I think that's the future of the Republican Party in America. It's still a bit, too much focused on libertarian and kind of free market economics, which is fine. I mean, it's still better than the alternative. I'm very much a free marketer, but, the state has to play a role to help people. And I think that's why socialism is on the rise in America, because a lot of young people are feeling like that. And I think if the conservatives embrace this a bit more, and I think G.D. Vance actually gets that, so that's why I hope he will be the next president. But I think more and more Americans get that, and I think that's how you can fight the guys like him in New York. And just kind of a side note, I'm not sure I would be in the Democratic Party situation, because of course on the one hand you have this, but in Virginia and New Jersey you had kind of centrist middle ground people winning very big. So what is your conclusion here? Are you going to the middle because that resonated with a lot of voters, and the economy is not doing well, you can perhaps get some centrists, or you go full vote because in New York that works? So I don't think they are in a comfortable situation either, because I mean they have to make some difficult decision on what is the party's future.
Sophie, you want to say something?
I was just wondering, the first time I heard that he was elected, my very first thought was, what a shame they didn't ask, like the New Yorkers didn't ask us here in Eastern Central Europe what it feels like to live under communist oppression. Because of course he said, okay, government-run grocery stores, we had that. And it wasn't that much fun. So that's the thing what you said about why young people think that socialism is this hip, fun thing where we're all equal and we receive everything. And the reason why they can have this crazy picture in their head is because they never had to experience it. And that's what is at stake at every election here in Hungary as well, because it's the same thing here, that my generation never had to experience what it feels like, but we do know from our grandparents, great-grandparents, what it really feels like to live under socialism. The reason why I was disappointed, not surprised, is because when I was in DC in 2019, I lived at the house of a Hungarian immigrant from the Károly family who moved there years ago. And his smallest daughter was the same age as me, which was 21, 22 at the time. And I asked her about American politics, who are you voting for? Who are you campaigning for? And she gave me a full-blown Bernie Sanders campaign speech, how great he is, the policies he stands for. And I really saw it in her eyes that she actually believed that this was the most wonderful system in which we can live, and everyone will be so happy, and Bernie Sanders is the way to go. And I thought she was joking, and then I of course understood she was not. But the reason, I think that we have to understand, like, not just the generational gap, but the generational frustration. And the reason how I could break this down, or the way I could break this down, is if we see boomers build liberal capitalism, millennials try to moralize it, and we have the Zoomers who don't care about capitalism or moralism.
Just to pivot off that very quickly, I mean, the fact he's Muslim, I think, is only really significant, really, because of the interesting contrast given it's a city that had 9/11 24 years ago.
And it's new and exciting.
If it wasn't, I think if it wasn't for that, it wouldn't be such a political issue. I don't think the interesting thing about him is that he's Muslim. It's more, obviously, his politics. And I think the way to look at that is rather diagnostically to say, why are people turning to that again? And I do think I just recently in New York, and everything's unaffordable. I mean, people can't afford rent there, and people are being crushed by, obviously there's the dangers you experienced in Hungary, communism, but, hyper-capitalism also, neoliberal capitalism has had its victims. And I think a lot of young people, they're coming out of university with massive student debt since universities got turned into corporations. They can't find a stable job because it's all 0 hours contracts, and they don't pay well if you can even find a job. And then you got massive rent to pay. So you got massive debt, can't find a stable job, can't pay your rent. And they have no prospects in terms of building up the money to settle down, buy a house, get married, have kids, and so on. And so it seems quite hopeless under the current system.
The state is actually helping non-citizens to get housing, and it's not helping you.
And then there's a perverse incentive to the state. Yeah, so it's so I think if I was there, much like the people supporting Fuentes and then the people supporting Mamdani, is that in both cases they may be looking to the wrong solutions. But I think the important thing is to recognize they're seeking something. They're seeking some sort of change. Right. And that's the common thing.
They don't trust the traditional parties to do it. I mean, you're absolutely right about affordability. That was the heart of Mamdani's campaign. The woke stuff was part of it, but in the end, he spoke to the deep frustration New Yorkers have about how unaffordable their city has become. Now, the solutions he has proposed are absurd and won't work. With rent control and all that. Nevertheless, he at least is speaking to the problem. We have to bring this to an end, and I think a good place to end it on will be something that Konstantin Kisin, the British commentator, said, talking about both Mamdani and the far right, the Fuentes types. He said that the Zoomers are making the same mistakes that their great-grandparents did. And thinking that let's try fascism or let's try communism.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Because they know nothing about history. But we don't have that excuse, because at least back in 100 years ago, communism and fascism hadn't really been tried. Well, we have a lot of experience now with seeing what can happen when those ideologies take over. And it's not good. But so what's happening now in America is we are seeing the cost of not teaching history and not insisting that our young people know what happened in the past. I mean, for young people in the Zoomer generation in America, ancient history is the 1990s. And we're going to see, hopefully we can get through this without too much destruction, but history is back with a vengeance. I want to thank you all for joining me today here on View from the Danube, and thank you so much for joining us too. I'm Rod Dreher.